Aaric Malhotra and Serena looked like Delhi's most glamorous couple, but behind the flashing cameras and glittering parties, their love story was rotting from the inside, turning into a nightmare that would end in obsession, captivity, and murder. Aaric Malhotra had always been the man who seemed untouchable. Born into money, he was the type of figure who could silence a crowded room simply by walking in. His charm was undeniable, his smile calculated, and his reputation in New Delhi's elite circles unmatched. Yet beneath the tailored suits and perfectly practiced confidence, Aaric carried a hunger that was more dangerous than anyone could imagine. It wasn't the hunger for wealth. He already had that. It was the hunger for control. That need was the very thing that would later destroy him. When Serena arrived in Delhi from Goa, she wasn't looking for attention. She came with quiet ambition, hoping to start a career in event management. She was strikingly beautiful, but it wasn't just her looks that drew people to her. It was her independence, her refusal to bow to the arrogance of the city's wealthy. That quality was exactly what caught Aaric's eye when they first met at a charity gala. From that moment, he decided she was someone he needed in his world. The romance that followed was nothing short of explosive. Aaric showered Serena with gifts, grand gestures, and relentless attention. Within weeks, she was seen on his arm at exclusive parties, her name appearing in society pages alongside his. To the world they looked like the ideal couple, a self-made woman admired for her spirit, and a rich, handsome man, adored for his generosity. People envied them, whispered about how fast they had fallen for each other, and speculated that marriage was only a matter of time. But what the world did not see was the speed at which Aaric's affection turned into possession. He became obsessive, monitoring her movements, questioning her phone calls, and insisting on knowing where she was at every hour of the day. At first Serena dismissed it as passion, believing it came from a place of love. She told herself it was natural for someone like Aaric to be protective, especially in a city where rumors spread like wildfire. But soon, the line between protectiveness and control blurred. Those closest to Serena noticed her childhood friend Raghav Bhandari, who had known her longer than anyone else, felt her slipping away. She stopped attending gatherings with her old circle, making excuses about being too busy or too tired. When she did show up, she carried a nervous energy, as though someone was always watching her. People whispered, but no one dared to challenge Aaric directly. His influence stretched far and wide, and few were brave enough to cross him. Aaric's business associate, Mira Kapoor, noticed even more. She had worked alongside him for years and knew his temper. Behind the polished exterior was a man prone to fits of rage when things didn't go his way. The way he spoke about Serena worried her, less like a partner, and more like a possession he couldn't afford to lose. Mira kept her suspicions to herself, but the unease grew every time she saw Serena smile with lips that trembled at the edges. As months went by, the cracks in their perfect love story widened. At one high-profile fashion event, Serena arrived late with Aaric, her hand clutched tightly in his. Photographers captured their laughter, but those who were there noticed the stiffness in her body, as though she was performing for the cameras. Behind the glamorous gowns and glittering jewels, her eyes carried something darker, a plea for escape hidden beneath mascara and a forced smile. What no one realized was that Serena had already tried to distance herself. She had once skipped an event, only to be pulled back into Aaric's orbit the next day, appearing alongside him as if nothing had happened. Friends assumed she had cold feet about the relationship, but the truth was far more frightening. Aaric had ways of ensuring she stayed exactly where he wanted her, and Serena quickly learned how difficult it would be to leave a man who had built his life on winning every battle. New Delhi had seen countless love stories, but this one was different. It was a love wrapped in wealth and power, but bound by fear. The city celebrated them, unaware that behind every smile and public display of affection, Serena was quietly fighting against the tightening grip of a man who believed love meant ownership. And as their story unfolded, it became clear that what began as a romance destined to dazzle would soon spiral into something far more terrifying. Raghav Bhandari had always been Serena's anchor, the one person she could rely on no matter how much her world changed. Growing up together in Goa, their bond was rooted in loyalty and honesty. When she moved to Delhi, he wasn't surprised by her ambition, but he was concerned when she stopped calling as frequently. At first he dismissed it as her being busy with work and her new life, but soon her silence felt heavier, like it was being forced upon her. When he finally managed to meet her, she looked thinner, her smile brittle, her laughter hollow. He knew something was wrong, but she brushed his concerns aside and blamed stress. Deep down, Raghav sensed it had everything to do with Aaric Malhotra. Aaric was no stranger to controlling behaviors, though most people only saw the charming facade. His presence was overwhelming, and Serena, once vibrant and outspoken, began shrinking in ways no one expected. Friends noticed that she no longer dressed the way she liked, instead choosing outfits that matched Aaric's taste. She stopped attending casual outings and rarely picked up her phone when old friends called. Her world revolved around Aaric, but it didn't look like love anymore. It looked like surveillance. The first real sign that something darker was unfolding appeared in Serena's apartment one humid evening. Neighbors heard shouting, followed by a loud crash. One woman reported hearing a scream, but when the police arrived hours later, the apartment door was ajar and the place was in disarray. Furniture was overturned, clothes were scattered, and a mirror had shattered across the floor. Yet strangely, nothing of value had been taken. Serena insisted it was nothing more than a burglary gone wrong, though her story didn't add up. No locks were broken, and the apartment's security cameras had mysteriously stopped working that night. Aaric, ever the protector in public, assured everyone that he was handling it privately. Inspector Devika Sharma, who later became central to the case, happened to be assigned the file. She found it odd that the investigation was quickly brushed aside and closed as domestic disturbance. Someone, she suspected, had leaned on the system to bury the matter. Still, at that early stage, she had little to go on and Aaric's name was barely mentioned. To the outside world, the couple carried on as though nothing had happened. Days after the so-called burglary, Serena appeared at a glamorous fashion event on Aaric's arm. She wore a sparkling gown, diamonds glittering at her ears, and smiled for the flashing cameras. Yet anyone looking closely could see her body language betrayed her. Her shoulders were stiff, her hands clutched tightly around her purse, and her gaze flickered nervously whenever Aaric leaned in too close. It was a performance for the world, a carefully constructed facade. Behind the smiles and photographs, Serena confided little to anyone, not even Raghav. But Mira Kapoor was paying close attention. She had known Aaric long enough to see the patterns: his temper, his obsession with winning, his need to own every part of his life. Mira recognized those traits for what they were: danger. She noticed Serena's silences, the way Aaric's voice would harden in private conversations, and how he seemed to tighten his grip every time another man glanced in Serena's direction. Mira began to feel that Serena was more prisoner than partner, trapped inside the image Aaric had built of them. The more isolated Serena became, the more reckless Aaric's behavior grew. He began controlling her work, insisting she cancel meetings and decline opportunities that would keep her away from him. He justified it by claiming he wanted to protect her, but in truth, it was about dominance. Serena, once full of ambition, found her career shrinking until she was known only as Aaric's companion. For Raghav it became unbearable to watch. Each time he saw her, she seemed more fragile, like a shadow of the friend he once knew. He noticed the small bruises she covered with makeup, the way she avoided eye contact when Aaric's name came up, and the silence that followed whenever anyone asked if she was happy. He wanted to intervene, but Aaric's reputation was intimidating. People in New Delhi knew better than to challenge him openly. Raghav's instincts told him this was no ordinary romance spiraling out of control. Something much darker was brewing beneath the surface. As the months went by, the signs were undeniable, yet Aaric and Serena continued to appear together at public events. Every photo reinforced the illusion of perfection, but for those who cared enough to look deeper, the cracks were widening. The story of a dazzling love affair that had enchanted the city was already beginning to unravel, though no one could predict how sinister it would become. Serena's presence in New Delhi began to fade as quietly as the city's monsoon rains disappearing into the heat. People who once saw her at every glittering event now only caught rare glimpses, and even those were fleeting. Aaric Malhotra explained her absence, with excuses that sounded convincing to the outside world. She was unwell, she was traveling, she was resting. For those who adored the idea of them as a couple, it was enough. For those who looked deeper, the explanations felt hollow. The truth was that Serena was slowly being erased, her voice silenced by the man who claimed to love her. Inside Aaric's mansion, the illusion of luxury disguised a reality far bleaker. Serena's independence had been stripped away piece by piece. He monitored her calls, took away her financial freedom, and surrounded her with staff loyal only to him. Each time she tried to assert herself, Aaric responded with unpredictable rages that left her shaken and afraid. He told her it was for her own protection, that the world outside was dangerous, and filled with people who would never understand their bond. Over time, those words twisted into chains stronger than any lock. Mira Kapoor, who had grown increasingly uneasy, decided to test Aaric's stories. She visited the mansion one afternoon, claiming she needed to discuss urgent business. Aaric, charming as ever, received her with practiced smile. But what caught Mira's attention was not Aaric's demeanor. It was the house itself. The room Serena was said to be resting in was locked. Aaric dismissed her curiosity with a vague excuse, but Mira's suspicion grew. On her way out, she noticed small, subtle changes. Certain personal items of Serena's were missing. Photos of the couple had been removed from frames, and the air carried a tension she couldn't shake. Meanwhile, Raghav Bhandari's concern turned into determination. He was no longer willing to sit back and watch from a distance. One night, unable to contain his worry, he followed Aaric discreetly. Aaric's car drove out of the city, down a winding road leading to his secluded farmhouse. The property was surrounded by high walls and security cameras, but through a crack in the gate, Raghav caught a glimpse that haunted him. Serena was pacing back and forth in a dimly lit room, her movements restless, and her face pale. Even from a distance, it was clear she was not the glamorous woman New Delhi had idolized. She was thinner, her shoulders hunched, her energy drained. She looked like someone trapped waiting for an escape that never came. Raghav's heart raced, but he knew rushing in would be a mistake. Aaric's influence stretched deep, and any wrong move could cost Serena her life. Instead, he kept what he saw to himself for the moment, weighing the risks of confronting Aaric directly. The man was powerful, wealthy, and ruthless, traits that made him nearly untouchable in a city where reputation could buy silence. Serena's imprisonment at the farmhouse was not only physical but psychological. Aaric used every tool at his disposal to break her. He alternated between moments of affection and sudden bursts of violence, keeping her off balance and uncertain. He isolated her so completely that the outside world began to feel like a distant memory. At times, Serena thought of running, but each attempt was met with consequences that reminded her how impossible it would be. Despite the fear that gripped her, Serena left small traces of her struggle. Notes, scribbled in the margins of old books, fragments of diary entries hidden away in drawers, and subtle gestures whenever she caught sight of a familiar face. These were her quiet cries for help, signals that not everyone recognized, but which Mira and Raghav eventually pieced together. The facade of a perfect romance was beginning to unravel in private. Aaric's obsession had transformed love into captivity, and Serena's once bright life was shrinking into darkness. While New Delhi still whispered about their glamorous affair, the truth was buried within the walls of a farmhouse, where a woman was being held against her will. Raghav knew he could not carry this secret alone. If Serena was to survive, he needed someone who had the power to stand against Aaric, someone who wouldn't be silenced by influence or fear. That realization would lead him directly to Inspector Devika Sharma, and with it, the first steps toward exposing a love story that was nothing short of terrifying. Inspector Devika Sharma had worked in Delhi's police department long enough to know when something was being hidden in plain sight. The file on Serena D'Souza's supposed burglary incident had never sat right with her. She remembered the notes, no forced entry, no valuables missing, the witness accounts of shouting. It wasn't a burglary, it was a warning. Still, the case had been shut down swiftly, almost too neatly, as though someone with power wanted it to disappear. When Raghav Bhandari finally came to her, hesitant and nervous, she felt her suspicions were confirmed. He told her about following Aaric to the farmhouse and what he had seen. His words were careful, but the fear behind them was obvious. This was more than a troubled relationship, it was something far darker. Devika knew she had to tread carefully. Aaric Malhotra was not an ordinary suspect. His connections reached politicians, business tycoons, even senior law enforcement officials. One wrong move could cost her the case, or worse. So she began quietly, pulling records, digging through property documents, and checking his financial trails. That was when Mira Kapoor stepped forward. Mira, though cautious,
provided copies of hidden transactions, money being funneled into unknown accounts, purchases of properties that Aaric never declared, and sudden transfers that suggested he was moving assets in preparation for something. The pattern was too deliberate to ignore. Her investigation eventually led her team to one of those abandoned properties on the outskirts of the city. It was a crumbling structure, surrounded by weeds and silence. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of decay. In one room, the walls were marked with faint scratches, as though someone had clawed at them in desperation. Then they found a box tucked into a corner, containing items that turned Devika's unease into certainty. A blood-stained scarf, pieces of jewelry, and torn photographs of Serena. At first glance, it looked like evidence of abuse, but then came the most chilling discovery: a small diary, its pages filled with Serena's handwriting. The diary was fragmented, incomplete, but enough to paint a harrowing picture. Serena wrote about her attempts to leave, her fear of Aaric's violent mood swings, and her feeling of being watched constantly. One line stood out more than the rest: "If something happens to me, it will be because he cannot stand to let me go." The words were raw, desperate, and impossible to misinterpret. Devika felt the weight of them in her hands, knowing they might be the only voice Serena had left. But Serena herself was still missing. Aaric, when questioned indirectly, claimed she was abroad for treatment, producing travel documents, and insisting that she needed privacy. Yet Devika's team quickly confirmed the flight never existed. The boarding passes were fake, the passport stamps forged. It was a carefully constructed lie, designed to buy him time. Time for what? Devika wasn't sure, but she was beginning to realize the scope of his deception. Raghav grew increasingly restless, frustrated by the slow progress. He wanted action, wanted Serena freed immediately, but Devika had to remind him that moving too soon could allow Aaric to cover his tracks. They needed undeniable evidence to bring him down, the kind of proof that even his influence couldn't erase. Behind her calm exterior, Devika carried her own urgency. She had seen enough cases slip through the cracks because of power and corruption. She wasn't going to let Serena become another name on a forgotten file. The pressure intensified when Mira revealed a terrifying detail. Aaric had been liquidating assets and transferring money abroad. To her it looked like he was preparing to vanish, possibly with Serena, but Devika suspected otherwise. The man's obsession wasn't about running away with Serena, it was about never letting her out of his control, even in death. That thought made the search all the more desperate. Each new discovery added another layer to the darkness surrounding Aaric. The glamorous parties, the lavish lifestyle, the carefully curated image behind it all was a man unraveling, his obsession crossing into madness. Devika and her team tightened their net, but Aaric remained one step ahead, shielding himself with lies and allies. For every lead they followed, another roadblock appeared. Still, the cracks were showing. The facade of the perfect couple was crumbling, and beneath it was something grotesque, a truth that would horrify even a city used to scandal. The missing woman, the bloodied scarf, the diary filled with fear, all pointed to one conclusion: this was not a love story gone wrong. It was a nightmare fueled by obsession, one that was inching closer to a deadly revelation. And though Aaric still walked free, the walls around him were beginning to close in, carrying with them the promise of a truth that could no longer be hidden. The weight of weeks of investigation pressed down on Inspector Devika Sharma and her team as they circled closer to the truth. Aaric Malhotra's empire was collapsing piece by piece, but the question of Serena's fate still hung over everything like a storm cloud. Rumors spread quickly across New Delhi. Some whispered that Serena had run away, others believed she was hiding abroad. Aaric fueled these stories, presenting himself as the abandoned lover, broken-hearted and misunderstood. But Devika had learned to read between lines, and every lie only made her more certain that Serena's story was buried somewhere much closer to home. The turning point came when a security guard, bribed by Aaric to keep silent, finally broke under questioning. He admitted that he had seen Aaric visit the farmhouse late at night carrying heavy trunks. His testimony, though vague, was enough to secure a deeper search warrant. Devika assembled her team knowing this would be their chance to uncover what Aaric had tried so hard to hide. The raid took place under the cover of night. Floodlights cut through the darkness as officers swarmed the sprawling farmhouse. From the outside it looked deserted, silent except for the rustling of trees, but inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Dust coated the furniture, rooms stood bare, and every corner seemed to hold secrets. At first, nothing appeared unusual. but Devika's instincts urged her to look deeper. She noticed faint marks on the floor near a bookcase, as though it had been moved repeatedly. Behind it, concealed almost perfectly, was a narrow door leading down to a hidden basement. The descent into the basement was heavy with dread. The air grew colder, damp with the smell of earth and chemical. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a room that felt less like storage and more like a shrine. Along the walls were personal items carefully arranged, dresses folded neatly, photographs of Serena at parties, and jewelry displayed as though in a private collection. At the center of the room stood a large metal chest, sealed tightly. Devika's breath caught as the lid creaked open. Inside lay Serena's body, preserved with a disturbing precision. She was dressed in one of the gowns she had once worn at a high-profile event, her makeup faintly visible, her hair brushed as though prepared for display. It was as if Aaric had tried to freeze her in time, unable to accept that she had wanted to leave him. Around her were small notes, fragments of writing where she had pleaded for freedom, each one ignored and mocked by the man who claimed to love her. The officers stood in stunned silence, the horror of the discovery sinking in. Devika felt the weight of both victory and despair. They had found Serena, but it was too late to save her. What struck her most was the grotesque tenderness with which Aaric had staged the scene. It wasn't just murder, it was possession carried beyond death. His obsession had transformed into a chilling need to keep her forever, even if it meant preserving her lifeless body like a trophy. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. New Delhi, which had once idolized their love story, now recoiled in collective shock. The glamorous photographs that had filled magazines were replayed alongside images of police removing evidence from the farmhouse. The illusion of perfection crumbled completely, exposing the monster hidden beneath Aaric's charm. Aaric was arrested, but even in handcuffs he showed little remorse. He spoke of Serena as though she still belonged to him, insisting that no one could understand their bond. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. The diary entries, the blood-stained scarf, the forged travel documents, and the final basement discovery. The jury needed little time to convict him. Life imprisonment was handed down, but for many it felt like too small a price for what he had done. For Raghav, the news was unbearable. He had fought so hard to save Serena, but he arrived only in time to witness the aftermath. His grief was shared by Mira, whose warnings had gone unheard until it was too late. For Devika, the case became one of the most haunting of her career, a reminder that beneath the polished exteriors of wealth and power, true darkness could lurk. The terrifying love story of Aaric Malhotra and Serena D'Souza became a cautionary tale told across the city. It was a story that stripped away the glitter of high society and revealed the dangers of obsession disguised as romance. In the end, it was not love that had bound them together, but control, fear, and a desire to own someone completely. And that was the kind of love story no one ever wanted to live.